My name is Maud, and at 71 I've lived in our Victorian family home in Burlington, Vermont for 45 years. As a retired librarian and widow, I've dedicated my life to books community and, most importantly, raising my 3 children, James, Lisa, and David. Over the years, they've grown increasingly distant, more concerned with wealth and status than family bonds. My late husband Robert always told me to plan for every storm advice I never truly understood until last Christmas dinner when my own children tried to disown me. Where are you watching from today? Hit like and subscribe to hear how I turned their ultimate betrayal into the greatest lesson they'll never forget. I grew up in Middlebury, a charming small town in Vermont, where everyone knew your name and family values were the foundation of our community. My parents owned the local hardware store, a modest business that provided a comfortable life and taught me the value of honest work. My father would often say, "Wealth isn't what you have, but what you give," words that shaped my perspective on life. Books were my escape and passion from an early age. I practically lived at our town library, devouring everything from classic literature to historical biographies. Mrs. Peterson, our town librarian, became my mentor and inspiration. By 16, I was helping her after school learning the delicate art of book preservation and the joy of connecting readers with just the right story. When I left for the University of Vermont in 1969, I was the first in my family to attend college. My plan was simple: earn my library science degree and return to serve my community. What I didn't plan for was meeting Robert Anderson during my sophomore year. Robert was studying business and finance with ambitious dreams that extended far beyond our small state. We met in the university library where I worked part-time. He came in regularly to study, always requesting books on investment strategies and business building. I admired his focus and determination, while he appreciated my knowledge and love of literature. "You're the only person I know who can find adventure without leaving a reading room," he once told me. Our courtship was filled with intellectual debates, shared books, and long walks across campus, discussing our future dreams. After graduation, Robert surprised everyone by turning down offers from prestigious firms in New York and Boston. "Why would I leave Vermont when everything I love is here?" he told his confused professors. He established his financial advisory practice in Burlington, determined to help local families build security through thoughtful planning. We married in a simple ceremony in 1974, surrounded by books in the university library where we'd met. Within a year, we found a dilapidated Victorian home on a large corner lot in Burlington's historic district. The place was in shambles. Peeling wallpaper, sagging floors, outdated everything. But we saw its potential. "This isn't just a house," Robert said as we stood in the empty, dusty living room. "This is our future family's legacy." For 3 years, we spent every spare moment restoring that house. Robert learned plumbing and electrical work from library books and community college courses. I stripped wallpaper, refinished floors, and learned the art of historic preservation. Every paycheck was carefully divided between necessities and home improvements. We did most of the work ourselves, hiring professionals only for the most complex jobs. James, our firstborn, arrived in 1975 while we were still in the midst of renovations. I remember nursing him in rooms half-finished, surrounded by drop cloths and paint cans. By the time Lisa joined us in 1979 and David in 1982, our home had transformed into the showpiece of the neighborhood, not because we had the most money, but because we had invested the most love. As Robert's business grew successful, he never forgot our humble beginnings. He specialized in helping ordinary families achieve financial security through careful planning and modest, consistent investments. His clients adored him for his transparency and genuine concern for their well-being. "Anyone can make money," he would tell his clients. "The trick is making sure that money serves your values, not the other way around. At home, Robert was a devoted father who made time for each child despite his growing business. He taught James chess and the fundamentals of finance. With Lisa, he shared his love of classical music and architecture. For sensitive David, he built an elaborate treehouse where they would read adventure stories together. Our family traditions were sacred Sunday dinners where everyone shared their weekly challenges and triumphs. Summer camping trips in the Green Mountains with no electronic devices allowed. And most importantly, our elaborate Christmas celebrations that combined the best of my literary imagination and Robert's joyful generosity. Each Christmas, Robert would create elaborate treasure hunts with clues hidden throughout the house leading the children to their gifts. As they grew older, the clues became more complex. Riddles based on books we'd read together, mathematical equations for James, musical notes for Lisa, and nature-based puzzles for David. The gifts themselves were thoughtful, rather than extravagant quality items that would last experiences that would build memories or books that would expand their minds. Things break and fade, Robert would say during our gift exchanges. Knowledge, memories, and character are the only true possessions. Our children thrived under this philosophy, at least during their formative years. James showed his father's aptitude for business and numbers, graduating at the top of his class before earning an MBA. Lisa developed artistic talents alongside sharp intellect, eventually pursuing architecture at Cornell. David, our youngest, inherited my love of literature alongside Robert's compassion, choosing to study psychology and education. We were immensely proud of them all, never measuring their success by income or status, but by their character and contributions. Robert and I believed we had succeeded in raising children who understood that wealth came in many forms beyond the financial. Everything changed in 2003 when Robert was diagnosed with aggressive pancreatic cancer at just 57. The prognosis was devastating, 6 months at most. In characteristic fashion, Robert approached his remaining time with methodical planning and unwavering focus on what mattered most. "This isn't the storm I expected to," he told me one night as we sat on our porch swing, "but I've always planned for unexpected weather." During those final months, Robert spent quality time with each family member, having what he called heart conversations. With the children, now adults, establishing their own lives, he shared wisdom, memories, and hopes for their futures. With me, he discussed practical matters, assuring me that financially, I would be secure. What puzzled me were his frequent private meetings with Howard Evans, his attorney and closest friend. They would sequester themselves in Robert's home office for hours, emerging somber, but somehow satisfied. When I inquired, Robert would simply say, "I'm making sure everyone is protected, including them from themselves." Robert passed peacefully in our home that December, surrounded by the family he adored. His funeral was attended by hundreds, clients, colleagues, and community members whose lives he'd touched. Our children showed remarkable unity in their grief, supporting each other and me through the dark days that followed. James temporarily relocated his work to Burlington to help manage his father's business affairs. Lisa postponed a major architectural project to organize Robert's papers. David, still completing his graduate studies, came home every weekend. For about a year after Robert's death, our family bonds seemed stronger than ever, forged in the crucible of shared loss. I committed myself to maintaining our family traditions, especially our Christmas celebrations. That first Christmas without Robert, I created the treasure hunt myself, hiding clues that led to special mementos of their father for each child. We cried together, remembered together, and promised to honor his legacy by remaining close. Little did I understand then how prophetic Robert's preparations would prove to be, or how dramatically our family would change in the years that followed. His final gift to us all wasn't just financial security, but a lesson in character that would take nearly 2 decades to fully unfold. The first subtle changes began about 3 years after Robert's death. James, who had taken over his father's financial advisory firm, began shifting the business model toward higher net worth clients. Where Robert had prioritized helping middle-class families build security, James focused on wealth management for the already affluent. Dad's approach was admirable but outdated, he explained during a rare Sunday dinner at my home. Today's market demands specialization in the luxury segment. I noticed how he'd begun dressing differently. Bespoke suits, designer watches, memberships in exclusive clubs, Robert had never seen value in joining. His language changed too, peppered with references to high net worth individuals and wealth class that would have made his father cringe. Lisa's transformation came through her marriage to Andrew Caldwell, heir to a real estate development fortune. They'd met when his family hired her firm to design their vacation compound on Lake Champlain. The wedding was an extravagant affair at a historic mansion featured in several luxury magazines, a far cry from the intimate ceremony she'd once said she wanted in our family garden. After honeymooning in the Maldives, Lisa and Andrew purchased a modernist mansion in Burlington's most exclusive neighborhood. Our traditional Sunday dinners at my home became increasingly rare as Lisa began hosting her own elaborate soirees with guest lists that included politicians and celebrities passing through Vermont. "You should come to one of our dinner parties, Mom," she'd say. "You might enjoy meeting people outside your usual circle." The implication that my circle, mostly fellow librarians, Robert's former clients, and longtime neighbors, was somehow inadequate stung more than she knew. David, always the most sensitive of my children, seemed caught between worlds. After completing his doctorate in psychology, he established a practice that initially focused on adolescents from disadvantaged backgrounds. Robert would have been so proud, but as his siblings' influence grew, David gradually shifted toward a executive coaching practice, serving corporate clients referred by James and Andrew. "There's nothing wrong with helping people who can actually pay for services," James told him during a family dinner I hosted for David's 35th birthday. Dad was sentimental about serving everyone, but that model doesn't build wealth. I watched my youngest son's expression as he absorbed this perspective, noting the conflict behind his eyes, but also his reluctance to challenge his older brother. Our family gatherings, once filled with meaningful conversations and genuine connection, increasingly revolved around displays of affluence. James would arrive in a new luxury vehicle each year, casually mentioning its 6-figure price tag. Lisa would reference her latest exotic vacation or home renovation project. Even David began dropping names of famous clients and exclusive conferences. What hurt most was how they spoke about their father's legacy, not his values or wisdom, but primarily the financial foundation he'd provided that had allowed their ascent into higher social circles. "Dad built a solid business," James would say, "but he never leveraged his client relationships to their full potential. We've tripled revenue since implementing my new strategy." The first direct comment about my home came during a Mother's Day brunch 5 years after Robert's death. Lisa, glancing around our living room with its comfortable but well-worn furniture, said, "Mom, have you thought about updating this Victorian style? Is so dated. Andrew knows an amazing interior designer who could modernize while keeping the historical elements." "I'm quite comfortable with my home as it is," I replied. "Your father and I chose every piece together." Lisa exchanged glances with James. "That's exactly why it might be time for a refresh. It's been years, Mom. Moving forward doesn't mean forgetting Dad." Over the next several years, these suggestions became more frequent and less subtle. "This neighborhood has really appreciated Mom," James mentioned while helping me carry Christmas gifts to the car one year. "You're sitting on significant untapped equity." "The maintenance on these old Victorians is a nightmare," Lisa observed when a minor roof leak required repairs. Wouldn't you rather have a modern condo with no upkeep concerns? I worry about you navigating those stairs as you age, David said, echoing his siblings' concerns despite the fact that I climbed those stairs daily without issue. I first realized they were coordinating these comments when I overheard James on his phone in my garden during a family barbecue. No, she's still resistant to the idea of selling. I know the development potential is enormous. Yes, I've tried explaining the tax advantages. Lisa's working the emotional angle about it being too much house for her alone. My heart sank as I quietly retreated before he could see me. That night, I went through Robert's old files searching for answers, reassurance, some indication of what he might have anticipated. I found nothing immediately obvious, but noticed several references to a trust he had established. The following week, I made an appointment with Howard Evans Roberts' attorney and friend, who had largely retired, but still maintained a small practice. I hadn't seen him in several years, and he seemed unsurprised by my visit. "I've been wondering when you'd come," he said after his secretary showed me into his wood-paneled office. "How are the children behaving?" The specific nature of his question took me aback. "Why do you ask about their behavior rather than how they're doing?" Howard's expression was both sad and knowing. Robert anticipated certain developments. He observed patterns during his career working with families and wealth transfers. He worried that without his guidance, the children might eventually prioritize the wrong things. "They want my house," I said plainly. "They've been suggesting, and now I've discovered they're actively planning for its sale, presumably after moving me somewhere more appropriate for my age." Howard nodded unsurprised. "The property has significant value beyond the home itself. That corner lot in the historic district with zoning that could potentially be changed. Developers would pay a premium." James mentioned development potential on a phone call he didn't know I overheard. I confirmed. Howard opened a drawer and removed a thick file with my name on it. "Robert asked me not to share certain information unless you came asking the right questions. I believe that time has arrived." For the next 2 hours, Howard explained the elaborate plans Robert had made before his death. The house and property had been placed in a specialized trust with specific conditions. I maintained lifetime rights to live there, but the trust contained strict provisions against development or sale for commercial purposes. Most surprisingly, Robert had established separate inheritance structures for our 3 children, contingent upon specific behavioral conditions rather than simply the passage of time. He called it his character insurance policy, Howard explained. Robert believed inherited wealth without earned wisdom could damage rather than benefit his children. He wanted to ensure they remained the people he raised them to be. "What exactly does that mean?" I asked. "It means," Howard said carefully, "that you have more control than they realize, and that Robert left you tools to test their character if necessary." Over the following months, I met with Howard several more times, developing a strategy based on Robert's foresight. I watched my children more carefully documenting their coordinated campaign to convince me I could no longer manage independently. James began noticing maintenance issues during his increasingly rare visits. "Mom, that banister feels loose. The porch has some rot in the corner. The chimney needs repointing. This is becoming unsafe." Lisa brought glossy brochures for luxury retirement communities and assisted living facilities. "Just something to consider, Mom. So many amenities, and you'd have people your own age for company." Even David, my sweet youngest, began expressing concerns about my memory when I occasionally forgot minor details of their busy lives. "Mom, remember when you couldn't find your glasses last visit, and now you've forgotten about Lisa's fundraiser next month. I'm a bit worried about these patterns." The gaslighting was subtle but persistent. They coordinated their efforts, never attacking simultaneously, but creating a consistent message. I was becoming incapable. The house was too much sensible people in my position would make the right decision. What they didn't know was that I had begun recording these conversations at Howard's suggestion. Nor did they realize I had discovered the actual development plans James and Andrew had already drafted for my property. Plans that would demolish my beloved home to build luxury condominiums. By mid-November, I had finalized my preparations with Howard's help. Special documents were drawn up, placed in elegant envelopes with each child's name. Recording devices were discreetly placed throughout the main rooms of my home. And I had made the painful but necessary decision to test my children in the way Robert had anticipated might be needed. Christmas had always been sacred in our family. Despite their busy lives and obvious agenda, I knew my children would not refuse my invitation to Christmas dinner at the family home. Tradition still held some power, and more importantly, they likely saw it as an opportunity to present a united front regarding my living situation. The night before Christmas, I walked through my home, touching the banister Robert had restored by hand, straightening the family photos on walls my children now saw as development opportunity. I carefully hung the special ornaments on our tree, the handmade ones the children had created in school, the crystal angel Robert had given me on our first Christmas in this house, the wooden stars he had carved during his final Christmas with us. In our bedroom, I opened the small jewelry box containing my wedding ring and Robert's, which I had removed from his hand before they closed his casket. "I hope I'm doing the right thing," I whispered, almost feeling his reassuring presence. "I hope there's still time for them to remember who they really are." Morning brought fresh snow and steely determination. As I prepared our traditional holiday meal, turkey with Robert's special stuffing recipe, cranberry sauce made from berries. The children once helped me pick vegetables from my garden I had frozen in summer. I felt strangely calm. The table was set with our family china candles, ready to be lit, envelopes discreetly placed in Robert's desk drawer for the moment they would be needed. Whatever happened today would forever change our family. But as Robert always said, sometimes a storm clears the air, revealing what truly matters once the clouds have passed. The house filled with familiar Christmas aromas as I made final preparations. The dining table set for 4 with our heirloom china and crystal looked festive under soft lighting. I had followed every tradition, Robert's antique train set circled the tree stockings hung from the mantel, and Christmas music played softly from the old record player. Everything was designed to evoke the happier times our family had once shared. At precisely 2:00, I heard the crunch of tires on snow and glanced out to see James's new black luxury SUV pulling into the driveway. They had come together in one vehicle, the first indication they had coordinated more than just their arrival. From the window, I watched them emerge. James, in an expensive camel hair coat, checking his watch as if already calculating how soon he could leave. Lisa adjusting her designer scarf, her diamond earrings catching the winter sunlight. David hanging back slightly, his expression harder to read, holding the designer shopping bags containing their gifts. I took a deep breath and opened the front door before they could ring the bell. "Merry Christmas!" I called, summoning genuine warmth despite my apprehension. Their greetings were polished but perfunctory as they stomped snow from their boots and entered the foyer. Lisa air-kissed my cheek, careful not to smudge her makeup. James offered a stiff half-hug. Only David gave me a real embrace, though briefer than his hugs of years past. "Something smells amazing, Mom," David said, the first sincere comment of the afternoon. "Dad's stuffing recipe," I replied, watching a flicker of emotion cross his face at the mention of Robert. The other two had already moved toward the living room, examining the space with barely disguised assessment. "The paint is really peeling around those crown moldings," Lisa noted, not bothering to lower her voice. "And that radiator is making concerning noises." "Looks like more roof problems," James added, pointing to a small water stain on the ceiling I hadn't noticed. "These old houses are money pits." I ignored the comments and directed them to the living room where I'd arranged a small bar cart with holiday drinks. Eggnog mulled wine, Robert's special Christmas punch. The mention of their father's punch, a cherished holiday tradition, seemed to momentarily break through their facade. Each accepted a glass, and for a brief moment, as we raised our drinks in the traditional family toast, I glimpsed the children I had raised. "To family," I said simply. "To family," they echoed, though I noted the quick glance James shot toward Lisa. The gift exchange that followed confirmed my worst fears about how disconnected we'd become. The presents they gave each other were extravagant. James presented Lisa with a designer handbag that I knew cost more than my monthly expenses. Lisa gave David a luxury watch that made him visibly uncomfortable. David gave James an expensive bottle of scotch, and Lisa a spa package at an exclusive resort. For me, there were practical, impersonal gifts clearly chosen with minimal thought. A generic cashmere sweater from James Bath Products from Lisa, and a large print edition of a book I'd already read from David. The latter hurt most, as it implied I was having difficulty reading normal print, which wasn't the case. In contrast, I had spent months creating personal gifts that reflected our history for James. I had located and framed the first dollar bill his father had earned in his business. For Lisa, I'd commissioned a local artist to paint our home in watercolor. For David, I'd compiled a bound collection of the bedtime stories Robert had invented for him as a child. Their reactions were telling. James glanced at his father's framed dollar and set it aside with a murmured thanks. Lisa admired the painting with professional detachment rather than emotional connection. Only David seemed genuinely touched, running his fingers over the illustrated stories with a vulnerability that gave me a glimmer of hope. Dinner began pleasantly enough with superficial conversation about safe topics: weather, local news, distant acquaintances. I noticed they carefully avoided discussing their personal lives in any meaningful way. No mentions of James's romantic relationships, Lisa's marriage dynamics with Andrew, or David's gradually shifting practice. As we finished the main course, an uncomfortable silence descended that would never have been tolerated in Robert's time. "How about dessert?" I offered, rising to bring out the traditional Christmas pudding. "Actually, Mom, before dessert we need to talk," James said, using his business voice. He glanced at his siblings, receiving confirming nods. "We've been concerned for some time now, and we feel that today, with everyone together, is the appropriate time to address the situation." I sank back into my chair, my heart pounding, but my face deliberately calm. "What situation would that be?" James cleared his throat, clearly launching into a rehearsed speech. "Your living situation, Mom. This house is becoming unmanageable. You're 71 now, and while you're remarkably spry for your age, we've all noticed concerning signs." "What signs?" I asked quietly. Lisa jumped in her voice, taking on the patronizing tone I'd come to detest. "The maintenance issues you're neglecting, for one, the forgotten appointments, the isolation. Living alone in a house this size isn't practical or safe." "I don't forget appointments," I countered, "and I'm hardly isolated. I volunteer at the library 3 days a week, host my book club monthly, and participate in the Historical Society." "Those are hardly vibrant social connections, Mom," Lisa said dismissively. "You need to be around people your own age in a setting designed for your needs." David, looking uncomfortable but committed to their plan, added softly, "We worry about you, Mom. What if you fell and couldn't reach help?" I looked at each of them in turn. "I appreciate concern but not condescension. I'm in excellent health. My mind is sharp and I love my home. More importantly, this house is where your father and I built our lives together." James straightened his expression, hardening. "This isn't just about sentimentality, Mom. It's about practical realities. The three of us have discussed this extensively, and we've come to a decision." "A decision," I repeated, emphasizing the presumption in his words. "About my life. About what's best for everyone." he corrected. We've found an excellent assisted living facility in Burlington. Private room, full services activities, medical staff on premises. We've already placed a deposit to hold your spot. I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the winter weather. Without consulting me, Lisa reached across the table as if to take my hand, but I kept mine firmly in my lap. Mom, we knew you'd resist. Change is hard at your age, but this really is the best solution. The house can be sold and those funds will cover your care indefinitely. And what happens to this property once it's sold? I asked, already knowing the answer. A fleeting glance passed between James and Lisa before he responded. The market for historic properties in desirable locations is quite strong. The proceeds would be more than adequate for your needs. I nodded slowly, noting his evasion. That wasn't my question. An uncomfortable silence followed before James apparently decided to abandon pretense. He stood assuming a posture of authority that was a poor imitation of his father's genuine leadership. Mom, we've tried to be gentle about this, but I'll be direct. This property is worth over $2 million if properly developed. The house itself is outdated and would require hundreds of thousands in renovations to be marketable as a single-family residence. The logical approach is to sell to a developer who can maximize its potential. Like Andrew's company? I asked quietly. Lisa flushed slightly but maintained her composure. Andrew's firm does have experience with historic district conversions. They could ensure some elements of the original structure are preserved in the new design. So you plan to demolish the home your father and I built by hand? Progress requires change, Mom, James stated flatly. Dad was a businessman. He would understand the financial logic. The mention of Robert and what he would want pushed me to the edge of my control, but I maintained my calm. And if I refuse this plan, you've created without my input. James glanced at his siblings before delivering the line they had clearly prepared as their ultimate leverage. We, the children, have decided that you are no longer a member of our family unless you cooperate with what's clearly best for everyone. The words hung in the air, their cruelty stunning despite my preparation for this moment. David looked down at his plate, unable to meet my eyes. Lisa maintained an expression of rehearsed concern. James stood firm, apparently convinced their unified front would break my resistance. To their visible shock, I laughed. Not hysterically, but with genuine amusement at the absurdity of their miscalculation. You find this funny? James asked, his confidence wavering for the first time. I find it sad, I corrected, rising from my chair with dignity, but also somewhat amusing that you believe you can disown me from a family that existed before any of you were born. Their confusion was evident as I walked calmly to Robert's desk in the corner of the dining room. I removed 3 sealed envelopes, each bearing one of their names, in my handwriting. Returning to the table, I distributed them with a steady hand. Here is my parting gift for you all. Merry Christmas. James took his envelope with suspicion, while Lisa grabbed hers with the excitement of someone who still expected to get her way. David accepted his with visible dread, perhaps the only one sensing that something significant had shifted. What's this? James demanded. Some kind of emotional appeal. Open it and see, I replied, retaking my seat. After all, family decisions should be transparent, shouldn't they? As they tore open their envelopes, I watched their expressions transform from confident control to shocked confusion, and in James's case, rapidly mounting anger. The room fell silent as my children absorbed the contents of their envelopes. Each contained identical copies of legal documents with personalized letters from both me and, surprisingly, to them, their father, written nearly 20 years earlier, but strikingly relevant to this exact moment. James was the first to react, his face flushing with anger as he slapped the papers down on the table. What the hell is this, some kind of joke? No joke, I replied calmly. Just the contingency plan your father put in place before he died. Lisa was frantically flipping through the pages, her manicured nail tracing the legal language. This can't be right. The house is in a trust. Since when? Since 2 years before your father's death, I explained. Robert transferred the property into the preservation trust with very specific conditions. David, always the most thorough reader, looked up with genuine confusion. The trust prohibits development of the property, and if you're forced to leave against your will, the house goes to the Vermont Historical Society rather than to us. I nodded. Your father anticipated that the property's value might eventually become more important to you than its significance. He wanted to ensure that the home we built together couldn't be demolished for profit. James was already on his phone, presumably texting his attorney. This won't stand up. We can contest it. There are laws against disinheriting children. You haven't been disinherited, James, I corrected. Your inheritance exists. It's just contingent on certain conditions being met. What conditions, Lisa demanded, finding the relevant section in the documents. I recited from memory the words I had read countless times over the past months. Final distribution of assets to beneficiaries requires certification by Maud Anderson that said beneficiaries have demonstrated character consistent with family values, genuine care for family members, and decision-making that prioritizes people over profit. The silence that followed was deafening. Dad gave you the power to withhold our inheritance based on your subjective judgment of our character. James finally asked, his voice a mixture of disbelief and rising fury. Not withhold, I clarified. Merely delay until the conditions are satisfied, or until my death, at which point Howard Evans makes the determination based on documented evidence of your behavior. Lisa's expression shifted from shock to calculation. What exactly does the trust contain besides the house? These statements indicate substantial assets. For the first time, I allowed myself a small smile. That's the other revelation your father asked me to share only if necessary. His visible assets, the business, his investment accounts, the life insurance, were only a portion of his wealth. I slid another document toward them. A bank statement showing accounts and investments none of them had known existed. Your father believed in living modestly while investing wisely. He maintained separate accounts that even I didn't know the full extent of until after he passed. The total value of the trust is approximately $12 million. The number hung in the air like a physical presence. 12 million. Far more than the 2 million they'd hoped to make from developing my property. 12 million, James repeated, his voice hollow. All this time, you've been planning how to profit from pushing me out of my home. I finished for him when you could have been demonstrating the character your father hoped to see, which would have unlocked resources far beyond what you imagined. David's hands were shaking as he reread his father's letter. Dad wrote this when he was dying. He anticipated this exact scenario. Your father watched families destroy themselves over inheritance throughout his career, I explained. He saw how money could corrupt even the most loving relationships. He created this plan not to punish you, but to protect you from your worst impulses. This is manipulation from beyond the grave, James protested, though with less conviction than before. No, I corrected gently. It's guidance from a father who knew his children might lose their way without him. Lisa, ever practical even in her evident distress, focused on the immediate implications. So the assisted living facility, the development plans, cannot proceed, I confirmed. Not without triggering the clause that redirects the entire trust to the Historical Society. You recorded us, David said, suddenly noticing a small device partially visible on the sideboard. This whole conversation, you knew what we were planning to do. I did, I acknowledged, on the advice of Howard Evans. The recordings don't give me pleasure, but they do provide documentation of your intentions today. James pushed back from the table abruptly. "This is unacceptable. We'll contest the trust. There must be legal grounds to challenge this manipulation." "You're welcome to try," I said. "Howard assured me the trust is ironclad, created by one of the top estate attorneys in the Northeast. But more importantly, is that really how you want to proceed, dragging our family through legal battles to prove exactly the kind of character your father hoped you wouldn't develop?" The question landed heavily, especially on David, who flinched visibly. "I think," I continued, rising from my chair, "that you should take some time to reflect on today's revelations, on the choices that led us here, and perhaps on who you've become versus who your father raised you to be." "You planned this whole thing," Lisa accused, her voice brittle. "Set us up to fail some kind of twisted loyalty test." "No, Lisa. I gave you years to demonstrate basic respect and consideration. Today merely revealed what was already there." I moved toward the living room, signaling that our Christmas dinner was concluded. "I think it would be best if you left now. I need some time alone, and you clearly have much to discuss." James grabbed his coat face, rigid with suppressed rage. "This isn't over." "Actually," I replied, "it could be the beginning of something better, if you choose to make it so." Lisa collected her purse and gifts in tense silence. David lingered behind his siblings' conflict, evident in every line of his body. "Mom," he began uncertainly. "Not now, David," I said more gently than to the others. "Take some time to think about your role in today's events, about what your father hoped for you. We can talk when you're ready." He nodded, eyes glistening with what might have been tears, before following his siblings to the door. I stood in the entryway of my home as they departed, James and Lisa striding quickly to the car without looking back. David pausing to glance over his shoulder with an expression I couldn't quite read. Only when their car had disappeared down the snowy street did I allow my composure to crack. I closed the door, leaned against it, and finally released the tears held back throughout the confrontation. They weren't just tears of hurt and disappointment, but also of strange relief. The worst had happened, and yet I was still standing. The deception was over, the truth laid bare. I moved slowly through my quiet house, extinguishing candles and storing leftovers from our abandoned meal. In the dining room, I collected the documents they'd left scattered across the table, the evidence of Robert's foresight and their betrayal. As evening settled over my home, I sat in Robert's old armchair by the Christmas tree, its lights twinkling in the growing darkness. "You were right," I whispered to his memory. "The storm came just as you predicted. I only hope they find their way back after the clouds clear." That night, surrounded by the remnants of a Christmas that had irreversibly changed our family, I grieved for what had been lost, but also found unexpected strength in standing up for the values Robert and I had tried to instill. Whatever came next would be difficult, but at least it would be honest. The morning after Christmas dawned with heavy snow blanketing Burlington in pristine white. I woke early after a fitful night, made coffee, and sat by my front window, watching neighbors shovel driveways and children test new sleds. Normal family activities that suddenly felt distant from my reality. By mid-morning, my phone showed missed calls from both James and Lisa, but no messages. I wasn't ready to speak with them yet, needing time to process my own emotions before facing their likely anger and manipulation attempts. I turned off the ringer and focused on restoring order to my home, packing away holiday decorations that now felt more painful than festive. Around noon, a tentative knock at my front door surprised me. Through the frosted glass, I recognized David's familiar outline. Unlike his siblings, he had always been the most reflective, the one who might actually be processing yesterday's revelations with genuine introspection. I opened the door to find him standing alone, snow-dusting his shoulders, his expression a complex mixture of shame, confusion, and regret. "May I come in?" he asked softly. No demands or expectations in his tone. I hesitated briefly before stepping aside. Yes. He entered cautiously as if seeing my home through new eyes. I couldn't sleep last night, he said, removing his coat and hanging it by the door. A small, familiar gesture that unexpectedly brought tears to my eyes. I led him to the kitchen, rather than the more formal living room, putting on the kettle for tea. Another family tradition for serious conversations. Neither of us spoke until we were seated at the small breakfast table where I'd helped him with homework throughout his childhood. I'm sorry, he finally said, his voice cracking. I'm so deeply sorry, Mom. The simple, straightforward apology, without qualifications or excuses, caught me off guard. For what specifically, David? He looked directly at me, accepting the challenge in my question. For betraying you. For allowing James and Lisa to convince me that their plan was in your best interest, when I knew in my heart it wasn't. For forgetting everything Dad taught us about family and values. I sipped my tea, giving him space to continue. I've been weak, he admitted, taking the easier path of agreeing with them rather than standing up for what I knew was right. They're forceful, especially together. James with his financial arguments, Lisa with her emotional manipulation. I told myself I was moderating their approach, but the truth is, I was enabling it. Why? I asked the question that had haunted me for years. What changed all of you so fundamentally? David stared into his tea as if searching for answers. Success, I think, or what looks like success from the outside. James started making serious money moving in circles where people are valued by their net worth. Lisa married into Andrew's world, where everything is about appearances and connections. And you, he sighed heavily. I wanted their approval. Professional recognition. To not be seen as the naive younger brother still clinging to Dad's outdated values. His voice broke on the last words. Except they weren't outdated at all, were they? Dad understood something fundamental that we've lost sight of. I felt a tiny flame of hope kindling, which is that wealth is meant to support a meaningful life, not become its purpose. David's eyes filled with tears. He lived that truth every day. Somehow I forgot it while trying to build my practice, impress colleagues, keep up with James and Lisa. We sat in silence for several moments, the weight of his realization filling the space between us. What happens now? He finally asked. That depends on choices, yours and your siblings, I replied honestly. Your father's plan wasn't meant as punishment, David. It was his attempt to guide you back if you lost your way. James is furious, David admitted. He spent the night researching ways to break the trust. Lisa is calculating how to convince you she's changed so she can access her inheritance. They're both missing the entire point. And what do you think the point is? His answer surprised me with its clarity. That Dad valued who we are over what we have. That he hoped we'd build lives of meaning and integrity, rather than just accumulate wealth and status. He looked around the kitchen, taking in the modest but well-loved space. That this home isn't just real estate to be developed, it's where we became a family. The genuine understanding in his voice brought the first real hope I'd felt in years. Your father would be proud to hear you say that. I've disappointed him terribly, David said, his voice thick with emotion. He expected mistakes, I assured him. What mattered to him was how you responded when confronted with those mistakes. David wiped his eyes visibly, struggling to maintain composure. I want to make this right, Mom. I don't care about the inheritance. I care about rebuilding trust with you. About becoming someone Dad would recognize again. That won't happen overnight, I cautioned. Trust once broken requires time and consistent action to restore. I know, he nodded. I'm not asking for immediate forgiveness, just a chance to try. I considered his request carefully, searching his expression for signs of the manipulation his siblings had mastered. Instead, I saw only raw honesty and genuine remorse. "A chance seems reasonable," I finally said. "Actions, not words, will determine where we go from here." Relief washed over his features. "Thank you. That's more than I deserve after yesterday." "What will you tell James and Lisa?" I asked, knowing they would pressure him for details of our conversation. "The truth," he said with newfound resolve, "that I'm stepping away from their plans, that I'm going to work on rebuilding my relationship with you independently of their agenda." He hesitated before adding, "They won't take it well." "No," I agreed. "They probably won't." As David prepared to leave an hour later, our conversation having covered painful ground but also opened possibilities for healing, he paused at the door. "Dad's letter to me," he said quietly. "He wrote it nearly 20 years ago, but it was like he was speaking directly to me yesterday. How could he have known?" I smiled sadly. "Your father observed patterns in families and wealth throughout his career. He understood human nature, our weaknesses and our capacity for growth. He hoped you'd never need those letters, but loved you enough to prepare them just in case." David nodded thoughtfully. In his letter, he wrote that the true measure of wealth is what remains when material possessions are stripped away. I think I'm just beginning to understand what he meant. After he left, I returned to my quiet house feeling both emotionally drained and cautiously hopeful. David's visit represented a small but significant crack in the united front my children had presented. His willingness to acknowledge wrongdoing without excuses suggested the possibility, however fragile, of authentic change. Over the following weeks, the family dynamic shifted dramatically. As David had predicted, James launched an aggressive legal challenge to the trust, hiring a team of attorneys to search for vulnerabilities. Their initial confidence faded quickly after consultations with multiple experts confirmed Howard's assessment. Robert had created an essentially ironclad arrangement. Lisa's approach proved more subtle. She began sending thoughtful gifts, books she remembered I enjoyed, homemade meals delivered by her housekeeper, offers to help with household tasks. Each gesture came with careful comments about misunderstandings and only wanting what's best. I acknowledged her efforts politely, but maintained emotional distance, recognizing the calculated nature of her sudden attentiveness. David, true to his word, took a different path entirely. He began weekly visits that involved no agenda beyond reconnection. Sometimes he simply joined me for dinner or helped with small home repairs. Other times we took walks through the neighborhood or visited local museums. He asked questions about my life and actually listened to the answers. Most importantly, he spoke openly about his own struggles to realign his life with values he'd temporarily abandoned. By early February, I had established clear but different boundaries with each of my children. James received formal communication only through Howard, as his ongoing legal maneuvers made personal interaction counterproductive. Lisa was welcome for occasional structured visits, but understood that superficial charm wouldn't instantly repair our relationship. David had earned progressively greater trust through consistent actions rather than empty promises. The family counseling that David suggested in late February became a turning point. Initially attended by just David and me, these sessions with Dr. Winters, a family therapist specializing in intergenerational conflicts, provided valuable neutral space to address painful truths. During our third session, Dr. Winters asked a question that crystallized much of our family's journey. "Maud, what do you believe Robert would see as the success metric for his plan?" After careful consideration, I answered, "Not compliance out of financial motivation, not superficial performance of expected behaviors. I think he hoped for genuine recognition of how far they'd strayed from their authentic selves, followed by the harder work of finding their way back. Dr. Winters nodded thoughtfully. Then perhaps the current family fracture, painful as it is, represents necessary growth. Sometimes systems must break down completely before they can be rebuilt on a healthier foundation. This perspective helped me accept the reality that our family might never fully reunite in the way I'd once hoped. James might remain estranged indefinitely, choosing pride and anger over reflection. Lisa might never move beyond transactional relationships. Only David had demonstrated the courage to face uncomfortable truths and begin genuine change. By spring, my life had developed new dimensions beyond family drama. I became more involved with the Vermont Historical Society, using my librarian's research skills to document historic homes in Burlington. I joined a photography club, discovering unexpected joy in capturing architectural details of buildings whose stories might otherwise be forgotten. I expanded my volunteer work at the library to include a literacy program for senior citizens. These activities connected me with people who valued knowledge service and authenticity, the very qualities Robert and I had tried to instill in our children. I developed friendships based on shared interests rather than obligation, creating a chosen family that supplemented my biological one. When David asked during a Sunday visit in April, "Are you happy, Mom?" I was surprised to realize my honest answer was yes, increasingly so. Despite everything that's happened with us, he pressed, genuinely curious. Not despite it, I clarified, partly because of it. The truth, however painful, is preferable to comfortable illusions. I'd rather know where I truly stand with each of you than maintain superficial harmony based on pretense. He considered this thoughtfully. Dad would say something similar, wouldn't he, about the clarity that comes from difficult truths? I smiled at the memory. One of his favorite quotes was from James Baldwin. Not everything that is faced can be changed, but nothing can be changed until it is faced. As spring blossomed into summer, Howard brought news that James had finally exhausted his legal challenges, having found no viable path to contest the trust. His response was to cut contact completely, informing Howard that he would revisit the situation after Mother's death. The cold calculation hurt, but no longer surprised me. Lisa, realizing that quick results weren't forthcoming, began showing small signs of more authentic engagement. During a garden visit in June, she admitted for the first time, "I think I've been measuring success by the wrong metrics. Andrew's world is exhausting, constantly comparing, acquiring, displaying. Sometimes I miss the simplicity of our family dinners when Dad was alive." It wasn't a full reckoning, but it represented her first step toward self-awareness. I acknowledged it with cautious optimism. Recognizing the problem is the beginning of finding your way back. David's transformation proved most profound. By fall, he had restructured his psychology practice to refocus on the adolescent clients he'd originally wanted to serve, accepting the financial implications of this choice with newfound clarity about his priorities. He began bringing his wife Maria to our regular visits, rebuilding family connections based on genuine sharing rather than performance. As another Christmas approached, 1 year since the confrontation that had changed everything, I reflected on Robert's ultimate goals. He hadn't created his elaborate plan to punish our children, but to guide them back to their authentic selves if they lost their way. In that light, the year had brought both failure and success. The trust remained intact, its financial assets still undistributed. But more importantly, it had forced a reckoning with character and values that might never have occurred otherwise. For David, this had catalyzed genuine growth. For Lisa, it had planted seeds of recognition that might eventually flourish. For James, it had at least revealed truths that had been hidden beneath polite facades. When I discovered Robert's additional letter in Howard's office that December, one intended to be shared only after the test had occurred, his wisdom across the decades brought both tears and confirmation. "My beloved Maud," he had written, "if you're reading this, our children face the character test I hoped they'd never need. Whatever the outcome, remember that love sometimes means allowing people to face consequences. True family bonds aren't measured by compliance, but by authentic connection. Some may find their way back quickly, others slowly, some perhaps never. Your task isn't to force reconciliation, but to maintain the lighthouse of values that guides them home if they choose to return." That Christmas, I hosted a different kind of gathering in our family home. David and Maria came bringing genuine warmth, and their announcement of a baby expected in spring, a grandchild who would know his grandfather's values through stories and examples. Lisa attended alone, still navigating her own journey, but making sincere if imperfect efforts. James's absence was acknowledged but not allowed to overshadow the cautious rebuilding of what had been broken. As we sat around the table that had witnessed both our greatest rupture and the beginning of healing, I realized Robert's true gift hadn't been the financial provisions he'd made, but the opportunity for authenticity he'd created. The trust wasn't primarily about money at all, but about trust in its deepest sense, the foundation of honesty, integrity, and genuine connection that makes family meaningful. The home we had built together remained standing, not just in its physical structure, but in the values it represented. The storm had come, as Robert predicted. And though it had changed our family landscape forever, what remained was stronger for having weathered the tempest. A year passed, then another. The changes that began with our Christmas confrontation continued to unfold, in ways both expected and surprising. David and Maria welcomed their son Robert Thomas in May, a joyful addition who brought new dimension to our healing family. Watching David parent with thoughtfulness and intention, reading the same bedtime stories his father had read to him, teaching early lessons about kindness and character, gave me profound hope for the future. He had not only recognized his missteps, but actively redirected his path, becoming perhaps more truly his father's son than ever before. His psychology practice thrived despite, or perhaps because of, his decision to prioritize purpose over profit. His work with adolescents expanded to include family therapy focused on healthy inheritance planning and intergenerational communication directly inspired by our family's painful journey. The most meaningful work often emerges from our deepest wounds, he told me during one of our weekly dinners, now a cherished tradition. Dad's lessons ended up shaping my career in ways I never anticipated. Lisa's transformation proved more complex and gradual. Her marriage to Andrew encountered significant stress as she began questioning the values their relationship had been built upon. During a tearful conversation in my garden that second summer, she confessed, "I don't know who I am anymore when I strip away all the external markers of success. The house, the clothes, the social connections, they've become my identity." I recognized in her struggle echoes of conversations Robert and I had with young adults during his financial counseling days. Finding yourself beneath those layers is uncomfortable, but necessary work, I told her. Your father would say it's like mining for precious metals. The most valuable elements require digging through substantial resistance. Her efforts at reconnection became gradually more authentic as she worked with her own therapist to understand the insecurities driving her material focus. Our relationship remained tender, marked by occasional setbacks when she reverted to old patterns, but the trajectory moved steadily toward genuine healing. James remained the most distant, maintaining his position that the trust was manipulation rather than guidance. His legal challenges exhausted, he adopted a strategy of minimal contact and apparent waiting for my eventual death. The knowledge that my eldest son viewed me primarily as an obstacle to inheritance brought profound sadness. But I had come to accept that some fractures might never fully heal in my lifetime. Yet even this situation evolved in unexpected ways. In the third year after our confrontation, James's carefully constructed professional world suffered a significant setback when his investment firm faced regulatory scrutiny over client management practices. The financial press that had once celebrated his meteoric rise now questioned his judgment and ethics. I learned of his troubles not through family channels, but from a concerned former client of Robert's who still checked in occasionally. My immediate instinct was to reach out to offer support despite our estrangement. Howard cautiously advised against direct contact, suggesting instead a brief note expressing care without expectations. "I've learned of your professional challenges," I wrote simply. "Whatever our differences, I remain your mother concerned for your well-being. If you need a quiet place for reflection, your childhood home remains open to you." 2 months passed with no response. Then on an ordinary Tuesday afternoon, a knock at my door revealed James, standing uncertainly on my porch. Older, grayer, the polished exterior somewhat diminished by recent stresses. "May I come in?" he asked, an echo of David's request years earlier, but with more hesitation, less certainty of welcome. Our conversation that day was cautious, circling around safe topics, neighborhood changes, weather patterns, distant acquaintances, before gradually approaching more meaningful territory. James didn't offer explicit apologies or acknowledgments, but his presence itself represented a significant shift. "The firm is stabilizing," he said, eventually staring into the teacup I'd provided. "But the experience has been clarifying about who stands with you when things fall apart." I nodded, recognizing the painful lesson many of Robert's clients had described over the years. "Your father often said we discover our true circle during difficult seasons." "I've been thinking about Dad a lot lately," James admitted the first time he'd mentioned his father without bitterness since our confrontation. "About how he defined success. It wasn't the way I've been measuring it." That single visit didn't immediately repair our relationship, but it opened a door previously sealed shut. James began occasional brief visits, each slightly less guarded than the last. Our conversations remained largely superficial, the deeper reconciliation still distant, but the absolute estrangement had ended. During this period of family reconfiguration, my own life continued to expand in gratifying ways. The educational foundation established through Robert's Trust awarded its first scholarships to local students pursuing careers in community service. I joined the board of the Vermont Historical Society, contributing my librarian's organizational skills to preservation projects. Most unexpectedly, I discovered a talent for writing. What began as personal journaling about our family's journey evolved into thoughtful essays about intergenerational relationships, legacy planning, and the true nature of inheritance. When I hesitantly shared some pieces with David, his encouragement led me to submit to a regional magazine focused on family issues. Money isn't the only inheritance. A librarian's perspective on family legacy became my first published piece at age 73, followed by others exploring themes of authentic connection, values, transmission, and healing family fractures. The modest recognition brought invitations to speak at community events and senior centers opportunities to share Robert's wisdom with wider audiences. These expanding circles beyond my immediate family brought richness I hadn't anticipated in my later years. Even developed friendships with fellow writers, historical preservationists, and community advocates, relationships based on shared purpose rather than obligation or history. When Christmas approached in our third year after the confrontation, I sent open invitations to all 3 children without expectations or pressure. The gathering that materialized in our family home represented imperfect but meaningful progress. David and Maria brought toddler Robert, whose curious exploration of the Christmas tree ornaments connected generations in tangible ways. Lisa came without Andrew. Their marriage now officially ended her emerging authenticity, both painful and liberating. James attended briefly, bringing formal gifts and maintaining emotional distance, but simply being present. A victory of sorts. As I watched them interact, sometimes awkwardly, occasionally with glimpses of former closeness, I reflected on how profoundly Robert's character insurance policy had ultimately worked, though not in ways any of us might have predicted. The trust remained intact, its financial assets still largely undistributed, except for educational foundation funding. But its true purpose had been fulfilled in forcing a confrontation with values that might otherwise have remained buried beneath polite family fiction. That evening, after the others had departed, and I sat alone by the Christmas tree, I found myself talking aloud to Robert as I often did in quiet moments. "You were right," I told his memory. "Not about everything. The pain has been tremendous. But about the necessity of truth, however difficult. About the possibility of growth through confrontation with our authentic selves." I touched the ornaments we had collected through 40 years of marriage. The crystal angel from our first Christmas in this house, the handmade decorations from the children's school years, the wooden stars he had carved during his final holiday season. "The house still stands," I continued, "not just physically, but in what it represents. A foundation of values rather than just property. A legacy beyond money." As another year turned, I recognized that our family story remained unfinished, the healing incomplete, but progressing. David had found his way fully back to his authentic self. Lisa continued her journey with growing self-awareness. James had taken the first tentative steps toward reconnection. The lighthouse Robert had created through his foresight continued to shine, offering guidance without force, illuminating a path home for those who chose to navigate toward it. Some had arrived safely at shore. Others remained at various distances in the waters, but the light itself never wavered. In my 75th year, I began writing in earnest, not just articles, but a memoir capturing our family's journey through prosperity, loss, conflict, and partial reconciliation. Not as exposure or retribution, but as honest examination of how wealth without wisdom becomes a burden rather than a blessing. The trust. A family's journey through inheritance, values, and redemption would become my gift to my children, grandchildren, and the wider community, a testimony to Robert's wisdom and our family's difficult but necessary confrontation with truth. As I wrote the final chapters, I returned often to the additional letter Robert had left with Howard, the one meant to be read only after the character test had occurred. "Remember my beloved Maud," he had written. "That family healing rarely follows straight lines. It spirals, doubles back, leaps forward unexpectedly. Some wounds may never fully close in your lifetime. But by standing firmly for our shared values, you've offered our children their most valuable inheritance, the opportunity to discover their authentic selves beyond the distractions of wealth and status. However, this story ends for each of them. You've provided the greatest gift a parent can offer. Truth, given with love, boundaries established with care and forgiveness, available without erasing consequences." On Christmas Eve of that year, gathered once again in the home Robert and I had built together, I looked around at our imperfectly healing family, David reading to his son from the same stories Robert had read to him, Lisa helping in the kitchen with newfound humility and genuine presence. James still somewhat separate but present, watching his nephew with cautious interest that hinted at his own ongoing inner work. The empty chairs at our table no longer represented only absence, but also possibility. Space for continued growth, evolving relationships and future generations who would know their grandfather's values through stories, examples, and the living legacy of lessons painfully but necessary learned. To family. I proposed as our toast that evening, raising my glass with gratitude for what remained after the storm had cleared. Not perfect, not complete, but authentic, and still becoming. Their glasses rose to meet mine, the light catching crystal in ways that scattered small rainbows across the table we had shared through decades of both harmony and discord. In those refracting lights, I glimpsed Robert's final gift, not just to me, but to our children. And beyond the understanding that true inheritance isn't counted in dollars, but in values, that genuine family bonds must be based on truth rather than convenience, and that the most precious legacy we leave is the courage to face ourselves honestly. Have you ever experienced a family betrayal that forced you to stand your ground and protect what matters most? Or perhaps you've been part of a family healing journey that took unexpected turns. I'd love to hear your stories in the comments below. Sometimes the most painful confrontations lead to the most necessary growth. If this story resonated with you, please hit that like button, subscribe to hear more family journeys, and share with someone who might need to be reminded that true wealth is measured in love and character, not bank accounts. Thank you for joining me for this chapter of my life, and remember that it's never too late to reclaim your authentic self.